we're building a DePIN flight tracking network, essentially rewarding the people based on performance, but also combining that with much better infrastructure, which means we're in a pretty cool position as we can actually create better infra than what is feeding all of aviation today. And I think that's a pretty good spot to be in as a DePIN.
We are joined by the CEO and founder of Wingbits, Robin Wingardh. Robin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bradley. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. After we spoke the last time, did quite a bit of research, and I have to say, I had no idea how flights were tracked, but it's really, really interesting stuff, especially some of the changes that were made recently, and definitely want to get into those nitty-gritty details in this video. But before we do that, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, give us your background and the things you were doing leading up to Wingbits.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is a little bit diverse, I'd say. I started my career as a professional golfer. So I'm from Sweden, but moved to the US, go to college, play college golf, and then I played professionally for a few years before I just by chance stumbled into the kind of entrepreneurial route, so to speak. I got the chance to work for an investment company, and with them, I got to be part of building 6 companies from the ground up. So not just me by myself, but me and together with a bunch of other people. So that was a really great learning experience. Past that, I've had 2 companies of my own. One failed. The other one worked out better. So I exited it in 2021. Moved back to Sweden, worked in the beverage industry as a CEO for a couple of years. So that was really interesting, both on the sales side, but also on the manufacturing side. And most recently, I worked at Klarna, which is a fintech company here in Stockholm, where I'm based now. And I was there for about a year and a half, leading some commercial teams, managing the larger merchants. And I just got sick of it. I love building things. I quit, didn't really have a plan. And I ended up in an accelerator called Antler. And I ran into my co-founder, Alex, who just so happened to also work at Klarna, but we didn't meet there. And he had a genius idea for Wingbits, and I thought it was super fascinating. And we kicked it off in November 2023. And so it's been just over a year now.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, once you get that entrepreneurial bug, if you will, it's hard to go and work for someone else again, I feel like.
It is. It's just like, even though you work a lot more when you do your own thing, it's just the feeling of you're choosing to do it.
Sure.
Like no one is telling you when to work and what to do. It takes a lot more time, but it's just so much more fun and rewarding.
Absolutely. I think I told you I left my corporate job earlier this year. I've been doing my own thing now. And man, to your point, I mean, I work definitely more hours than I ever worked before, but I love what I do. It's on my terms. I work the hours when I want to work the hours. So it's definitely nice. And so you're a professional golfer too. You said for what, 3 years?
Yeah, about 3.5. Yeah, I mean, I was really good as an amateur. I think at my best, I was top 20 in the world for a brief stint, but I was pretty good. And then as a professional, I mean, I had some decent tournaments, but it was just, I don't know. It was just a combination of not losing passion, but also I got to build this little side business. And I just thought building a business was just so much more fun than playing golf. So I just quit.
I'm planning a trip out next year overseas. So if I get out to Sweden, maybe we'll get out there. I'm far from a professional golfer, but I can play with pace. So I think we'd still have a good time out there. But getting back to Wingbits. So you guys came up with the idea. You said it's been a little bit over a year now. Give us kind of your elevator pitch on Wingbits, and then I do want to dig into how the flight tracking works and all that, because I think that's super fascinating.
Yeah. So if you look at flight tracking, kind of on a wider scale, it's already decentralized in nature. So you have these enthusiasts all around the world collecting this data, passing it on to one of the major flight tracking networks, who then make hundreds of millions of dollars a year by selling this data. Well, the space have not seen any innovation for the last 10 to 15 years. So the people that contribute data earn nothing, and the infrastructure is subpar. So we're building a DePIN flight tracking network, essentially rewarding the people based on performance, but also combining that with much better infrastructure, which means we're in a pretty cool position as we can actually create better infra than what is feeding all of aviation today. And I think that's a pretty good spot to be in as a DePIN.
Digging in a little bit more on the competition. So you said that it's been flight enthusiasts. How has that data been collected for the competitors up to this point?
Yeah, so if you look at the bigger networks like FlightAware or FlightRadar, for example, they have just people that love aviation. They love tracking airplanes all around the globe hosting these devices and antennas essentially for free. How it works is you send data to one of the platforms. In return, you get access to the platform, like a free subscription access, pretty much. But that becomes like a very binary model, right? So like it doesn't matter if your station is really great or if it's really bad, as long as there's some data being transferred, you have access. So it doesn't really create a very optimized network, but also I feel like people will not go as far out of their way, for example, to, like in your case, deploy many devices. Like if all you get is access, doesn't matter if you have 1 or 1,000, why should you deploy 1,000? And quite frankly, I think we really wanted to find a way to essentially do kind of like how do we give back to the community? And based on how the financial system works, how the world works, blockchain is really the only viable option on a global scale. So we opted for that.
As far as the data that's being tracked, because I know that's changed quite a bit too with this new ASD-B data. Also, from a legislation or regulatory standpoint, that's been really pushed forward in the last few years. But yeah, if you could break down kind of how flights used to be tracked, how this new data is being utilized, and how the regulatory environment is pushing that forward.
Yeah, so I mean, the technology itself, ASD-B, is quite old. I mean, it's radio, but it's recently became regulated pretty much everywhere. I think, Europe regulated in 2017, US came in 2020, I believe Canada was maybe 2021. And what that means is that any plane that flies through commercial airspace or civilian airspace has to transmit the signal called ASD-B. So how that works is the plane gets their GPS location from the satellite, and then it broadcasts this radio signal out everywhere. And in the signal, you have one, obviously, GPS location, but like speed, altitude, barometric pressure, tilt, heading. And now in the later versions, you also will have turbulence indicators and weather conditions. And essentially what it allows you to do is get a very, very granular picture of the entire flight. And it's also a much more accurate than, for example, radar. So still, airports use usually a combination of having their own radars and then having some type of ASD-B, either via a partner like FlightAware Flight Radar or maybe their own. But FAA is actually planning on, over time, phasing out radar in lieu of ASD-B. It's, the industry moves slow. There's still a lot of safety measures that need to be taken because you do have a lot of issues with spoof data or GPS jamming and that sort of thing. What it allows you to do, essentially aggregate all this data. You get really granular insights into what is airspace looking like, how are planes moving throughout their travel, are there holding patterns, proving an inefficiency at an airport, how are planes moving to gates, how long are they staying, which runways they take. So it just gives you a very, very granular, good overview with a lot of information. Like with a radar, you see something coming, but you have to manually contact the plane to say, well, who are you? You're a green blip on my screen. Whereas ASD-B is they send all the information to you. So it's a much better way of doing it. And since it's more accurate, theoretically, you could actually pack more planes into the air because you can have a lower buffer since there's more accuracy. But again, then you have to make sure, okay, well, is there GPS jamming going on? Is there spoofing going on? Obviously, there's a lot of things that has to take place before you can fully do that. And also, I mean, a fun side note, I don't know what it is, but an airport, they have their official radar systems. So that covers maybe 30 minutes from the airport. So outside of that, a lot of times to see what is happening up in the air, they have to rely on these systems that are, ran on volunteer-based data, essentially to see, well, what plane is on the way in, but it's 3 hours out. So
I know you guys have made a lot of progress in getting deployments out there. In one of the interviews I listened to where you were talking about how many events you all are seeing on a daily basis. Could you give us some metrics on what that looks like? Yeah, so in terms of how many events we capture, it's about 7 billion a day, and that doesn't equate to 7 billion flights, obviously. But essentially how it works is that the plane sends a signal twice a second. So, with all the airplanes, that becomes a lot of events. In terms of how many flights we see per day, obviously it's a little bit seasonal, but on average it's above 120,000 unique flights per day. Some days it spikes way up and so on. But we don't have global coverage yet. Based on our reporting, we cover probably around 38 to 40% of land mass. But essentially what you want to do is you want to cover the top few hundred airports. Because that's, if you cover the top 300 airports, for example, in terms of traffic volume,
you cover pretty much 80% of all commercial traffic.
Well, how many deployments do you have today? And then I do want to talk about some of the new hardware coming out and what your goals are for next year.
Yeah, so currently, since we started with a sort of a build your own model, so heavily a Raspberry Pi based, and people repurpose Helium miners. We stopped that it ended up being 2,100 live devices that we have now. After that, then we opened up the pre-sales of the new device October 14th, I believe it was, and we've sold about between 1,500 and 1,750. Since we don't sell the hardware, it's sold by Hyfix's resellers, so we don't have the exact numbers, but it's in that range. Looks like we're selling maybe 10 to 15 a day. So these devices will be shipped out in January. So we forecast being somewhere around 4,000, maybe even 5 if it takes off even more by middle of Q1 next year.
Wow. To get, let's say 70, 80% coverage, if you will, how many deployments do you think you'll need?
I think it depends a little bit on the distribution of the devices, because you can have, if you have 10,000 devices in one country, it doesn't really give you access in any other country. But based on the model we're using with, so one antenna per one of these ground locations, essentially locks it in. We think we'll need about 7,500 to 10 or 11,000 to have global coverage. So that's kind of based on current growth trends. There's going to be some areas that are more difficult, obviously, down the road to cover, but to capture the majority of the traffic compared to existing networks, that's kind of what we need.
The nice thing about the token incentive model, right, is that if there are areas as you progress that need coverage, you can always, somehow use tokens to incentivize deployments in those areas down the road, right? Similar to Geodnet, I think they estimated when they got to 10,000 base stations, they would have, around 80% of the market addressed. And you are working with Geodnet, right? So that the new hardware that's coming out, you said it's expected to start shipping in January, right? It is a dual miner. So what can you tell us about that hardware that's coming out?
Yeah, so there's 2 different versions. One is obviously the Wingbits only. But what's cool about that one is it still allows us to use Geodnet's very accurate proof of location, which is actually a really big selling point for our network, since no other network has any type of actual location on their devices. And the second version is the Wingbits Geodnet dual miner, and that's kind of all in one. It's not an upgrade kit that you can use with your existing Geodnet miner. You essentially get to participate in both projects just with one device, and it makes it simpler, plug and play. And it's quite a few upgrades in this device. So it's going to be a kind of a state-of-the-art device from what we've seen.
Geodnet's also one of my favorite projects. I love what you guys are doing too. I think it's going to be a great synergy, especially being able to tap into each other's communities for more deployments. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Something you said that I want to dig in a little bit more on was the fact that you have very precise location data. So I think that's one of your big differentiators against these other, crowdsourced networks from flight enthusiasts. For one, you can make sure that you have really accurate GPS, latency, right, uptime. So what are some of those things that give you guys an advantage over the data that's going to be collected?
Yeah, I mean, so we essentially have advantages both on the incentive side, but also on the infrastructure side. So on the community side or incentive side, one is that on average, one station in our network is much better than the average station in the existing network, simply because people actually try to optimize it. So we actually pulled some numbers because they were somehow public, where we see that pretty much over 50% of all the stations in one of the largest networks have the performance of an inside antenna, which is pretty poor. Whereas, we look at ours, majority are really good. And that's simply because it makes no sense to set up a poor performing antenna. That's one thing. And the other thing on the community side is kind of there's more strategies in terms of growing the network, because all the other networks, they have a really big overlap in the community. So communities share to all the networks, so they have essentially the same data. Whereas we have more of a unique community, but we can also incentivize better. Okay, we need coverage in a specific region, right? Either we can have, people, we have the host, the host wallet sharing, so you can actually send an antenna to host, do a reward split. That's something new. We have many more opportunities to go with large device deployers that want to do that in specific regions. But then we also, of course, are able to, if we want to do a bounty area or regional multipliers or that sort of thing. So we have many more ways of growing. And currently, I mean, we grow about 6 times faster than the other networks have done in the past. So the model works pretty good. So that's on that side. On the infra side, one, yes, like a proof of location is quite important because you want to, and that combined with cryptographically signing the data. So you can say, okay, well, I know this data is coming from this actual device, and this actual device is in this location. That gives you much more security and validation on the network. But it also opens up for pretty cool use cases, like if you see that this plane is, let's say it's being attacked, like there's spoof data coming to the plane. This plane is reporting that it is in area X. Okay, well, based on we know the stations are here, we could triangulate the signal and say, well, the plane is actually here. So we can actually have a much better overview of where that's taking place and showing where the plane actually is. Same thing on GPS jamming, knowing like, okay, these stations are reporting the low quality in the signal, so we can actually see that GPS jamming is happening here. Well, is the data coming from this device, or is it being shot from a device in Portugal, and then the data, they just shoot it from 10 devices into one that is located somewhere else, and you don't really know where they are. So it opens up for much more use cases, much more accuracy, better latency, because we don't have to do so much real-time processing. And we've seen that too. We've talked with some companies in the intelligence sector, for example, and they can't even buy the data right now from the existing ground-based networks because there's no security. Our hypothesis is that better infra leads to new market segments opening up. So that's what we're hoping for. We don't know that yet, but so far it's on the right track.
That's actually what I want to talk about next. So that's a good transition. The markets that y'all are moving into, I know earlier you mentioned, some of these competitors are bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars a year. With this new ASD-B data, it does open the door for new use cases. So, what use cases do you see being able to tackle first and foremost? And then kind of moving forward, what do you think can emerge, especially with AI and being able to run models and so forth?
Yeah. I mean, the first product is a simple live stream of the aggregated data in raw format. And the customers that buy that data are usually customers that are a little bit larger, and they have a really high internal data processing capabilities. So that's the lowest hanging fruit because it's simple for us to essentially set up that product. The second product would be more towards a sample down data stream or historical data sets, for example, and also filtering based on maybe specific fleets. Because if you're an airplane lessor and you only want to follow your fleet of planes, you don't need the data from the whole globe. And then you can price it per tail. So that's probably the most logical next product, because based on how we set up our backend, that's also something that's pretty simple for us to set up. In the future, it's we're going to start enriching the data, combining it with different type of data sets. We're really focusing on the data aspect, because in the beginning we thought, we can build all types of analytics products on top of the data. There's thousands of companies buying this data to build analytics on it. We think we're better off focusing on creating the absolute best data aggregation network and enrich it in better ways and just supply that to all these buyers. So that's kind of what we're working on now. But our background is not in aviation. We did bring in some domain expert now from aviation. So that may change, but that from everything we gathered, it makes the most sense to just focus on the data aggregation aspect and selling data in different formats.
To your point, I mean, if some of these other companies have already built out the analytics side, if you can be a feeder of a higher quality data set, they're going to want to buy your data, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense.
But it's also kind of like starting a company. I mean, there's the hardest thing about building what we're building is that there's like a million opportunities. Yeah. We see like, this would be fun, that'd be fun, this would be fun, that'd be great. But we think, okay, let's be really great at this first. And when we're really great at this, okay, well, then we can look. But if we do everything now, we're going to be average at everything.
That's a very valid point. In fact, I worked at a drone service company in DC, and we had that issue. We were focusing on way too many verticals, instead of trying to be really good at one or two verticals, and it spread the company out way too thin. So I think that's the right way to go about it, is to really hone in, get really, really good at one specific thing, and then kind of, grow from there. So I think you guys are on the right thought process there. How does AI work into this? This is something that we're seeing a lot of, where the data can be more valuable. Is it with real-time data analysis, or what use cases do you see AI kind of mixing in here?
Yeah, I mean, two of the kind of big ones that they're working on top of this data. One is like a flight delay prediction type of model, because if you look at flight delays, I think FAA came out with a report. I think globally it cost $75 billion in 2022. So it's it's a pretty significant cost.
Yeah.
Because when a plane is delayed, I think it costs just over $100 a minute for a delay. And then you have that on a global scale. It's a lot of money. But if you look at delays, I think it's 46% of all delays are what you call knock-on delays. So essentially, plane A is delayed and it causes knock-on delay effects down the line. So what you want to do is essentially say, okay, well, we know this plane is here right now. It's going to be delayed. How does that affect future flights? Because if you have a small plane, you can fly 3, 4, 5 times in one day. So if first flight is delayed, how does it affect second, third, fourth, fifth? And what does that happen to like the crew management aspect of it? Like, are they going to be over hours? So you have to swap a crew. Do you actually have to swap the plane if it's too delayed? Do you just cancel? It also allows with resource allocation on the airport for ground operations, like knowing what's going to happen, like even if it's just a few hours into the future. It doesn't have to be like, oh, a year into the future this is going to happen. But if it gives a little bit more of a productivity approach, that would save billions of dollars. So that's one big use case. The second one is kind of tied into that. So when an airline, you have to book your slots for the gate like a year ahead of time. And if you miss your slot, it's quite hefty fines. So they usually add a buffer. So they pay more just to be safe. But is there a way to essentially optimize that gate slot? If you have better prediction models, if you have better data, can you lower it? And that would also save millions and millions of dollars a year for an airline. And I think the average profit margin for airlines is like 2%. I mean, 3%. It's bad. Everyone in aviation is making a lot of money except the airlines. But the airlines are massive at scale. So like if they can solve like every fraction of a percent they can improve, it's a lot of money. So they are really heavily looking at this. Those are like the two that stand out in my mind that we hear quite a bit, and that makes a lot of sense.
I didn't realize how much money these airlines were losing on flight delays. I mean, that Southwest situation that happened a couple of years ago, man, they got crushed on that. So I think anything that can help these airlines, especially if they're running on margins that small, I mean, anything that can move the needle at all for them is going to, with the amount of volume that they do, would definitely make a huge difference for them.
I think it's going to be a thing where they want to improve, like you hear about improve 1% in many areas, and the overall improvement is really large. Because also, if you say like, okay, you want to spot if planes end up in a holding pattern, essentially they have to circle around and wait to land. Okay, well, if they know that it's going to be occupied when they arrive, they can slow down and burn less fuel. So they will still land at the same time, even if that's delayed, but then they at least save fuel. Obviously, aviation is really under scrutiny for emissions. And if you look at the forecast, like aviation is going to be a big part of global emissions in the future. So there's a lot of scrutiny on that. They have to figure that out. But it's also, if you kind of know this, because an airport can have like really high capacity for how many planes can land, but it's still based on how many people are actually working there. So even if you have capacity to land at 1,000 planes an hour, that's a lot. But you need enough people working. If you have don't have enough people, you can't land. So there's just so many pieces that are connected. It's super complex. And again, my background is not aviation, so we're learning a lot. The more we learn, the more opportunity there is, but the complexity also increases. The more we learn, the more we learn, the more we understand we don't know. It's really fun.
Since it's an emerging industry, right? Because this ASD-B data is now required all over the world.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see more and more use cases, things we're not even thinking of right now that could be potential revenue streams, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is like now, since pretty much all plane has this transmitter, it just means that you have more complete data sets because everyone is sending it. So that's why it's actually becoming more useful.
Do you see any other industries like maybe drones? Everything going on with the drones in New Jersey right now. I'm just curious, like, do you see that as a potential revenue stream in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we did include a drone tracker in the new hardware. I actually forgot to mention that. So different sized drones will transmit in different ways. So larger drones will be on either like the 1090 megahertz that we track now or potentially 978. So far it's leaning towards 1090. And smaller drones will transmit over 2.4 gigahertz. So we included the receivers in the new hardware. The drone industry, I think no one will argue that it will not be here. The question is like when. Right now, there's a lot of money going into the drone industry, but that's mainly investor money. So majority of the money inside that ecosystem is just investments. It's not generating so much revenue per se from actually selling their services yet, but it will. I think that will be of importance. The issue with like what's going on with the drones now in the US is obviously a drone can decide, I'm not going to transmit any signal. We're focusing more on the commercial drone aspect, like Amazon is using drones and there's a bunch of drones delivering stuff everywhere. Yeah, that needs a tracking network. The people that are, trying to do bad things with drones, you're going to need a different system. Like I don't know enough to make an educated guess on what that will be. But is it like some type of like essentially advanced video monitoring system that monitors the sky? I don't know. So that's going to be interesting. But then you also have the advanced air mobility segment, which is have a lot of money streaming into it. Going to build these, they call them vertiports all over the world. And you can go on a website called aamindex.com, I believe it is, to see where these vertiports are planned. And that's essentially flying taxis, flying cargo that share airspace, but they don't fly up with airplanes. That segment is going to need better infrastructure to rely on, and we're hoping that we can be that infrastructure. But I think there's a lot of pieces that have to fit in with this drone industry growing. I mean, okay, if a drone flies, one, it has to be a solid infrastructure to keep track of them. Because imagine you have an ambulance helicopter coming here, and all of a sudden you have a drone. Like they need to know that they're coming. But also, okay, a drone, what if it has to recharge? There has to be some type of charging stations along these highways where the drone can land, probably like a machine-to-machine transaction type of thing, charges or swaps battery or whatever, and then it keeps going. Just a lot of pieces that have to kind of grow at the same time. So it's going to come. It's just, it's complex.
Especially the bigger drones. I have like a Mavic. I've actually got my Part 107 pilot's license. So drone pilot's license, I should add. But I have a Mavic 2 Pro, and I think I can keep that thing up there for like 10, 15 minutes. And then I got to bring it back down and change the batteries out. But sounds like there's plenty of opportunity for you to tap into now. I'm excited for this new dual miner with Geodnet to start shipping and seeing the deployments grow. I think if you're seeing 10 to 15 orders a day and where we're at in this market cycle, I wouldn't be surprised if you all hit, 10,000 base stations middle of next year, potentially. I think it's possible, assuming you guys have the manufacturing capacity to keep up. That does bring me to the next topic though, real quick, because I know we have a few minutes left here, but so you haven't launched the token yet. So the mainnet launch is expected to happen with it Q1, right?
Q1, correct, yes.
Okay. And you all are building on Solana, right?
Yep.
So curious, what made you all choose Solana over, other blockchains?
I mean, we actually considered multiple, and it's multiple we like. We just end up going with Solana because, they do have a good track record. They've been through a lot of bad times, like with the FTX collapse and all that. They came back stronger, super good developer system, a lot of active users. And, sometimes people say, oh, Solana, the DevNet's down or the network is down. But since inception, their uptime is still over 99%. And you can also, scalable. We looked at scalability. We thought Solana is very scalable. It's very mature ecosystem. There's other DePINs building on there. So overall, we just thought we like Solana. We thought it was a good option for what we didn't want to have to worry so much about that part, and that's kind of essentially how we base it.
I think it was a great choice. Obviously, you also want to choose a layer one that has a lot of liquidity in the ecosystem, and Solana certainly has that right now. And it does seem like most DePIN projects are on Solana now. And there's been a lot that started elsewhere that pivoted over. We're seeing some now go to Base, but I think Solana is like the leader right now for DePIN projects. Obviously, there's some DePIN specific blockchains that are starting to launch, but no, I think that's a fantastic decision. Do you have any idea of early Q1? I mean, what are you guys targeting?
To be on the safe side, I would say middle to late.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that there's some interesting stuff that we're working on that would make that work very well.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, are there any exciting announcements you might be able to talk about? Maybe vaguely, if not too specifically, anything you can tease?
I actually am sitting on some super exciting announcements, but like I told you, we can do a follow up when they're actually like set in stone.
Okay.
And we can do that, but it hurts me to not be able to talk about them now, to be honest.
All right, we can definitely do a follow-up. So I want to get this out. I want to get this out so that people can learn about this project, get their pre-orders in on their equipment. I'll put a link in the description for anyone wanting to order Wingbits equipment so you can get a deployment up and start participating. And that is expected, that new one's expected in January to start shipping. So we're almost there. Hard to believe.
Time flies, really.
Yeah. Well, Robin, hey, I appreciate you making the time. I know you're over in Sweden. We have a little bit of a time difference here. I'm glad we were able to nail down time to talk here. And really cool stuff what you all are doing. I think this project really has legs. I'm excited to see where things go. And I'm also excited to do the follow-up discussion to talk about the stuff that you're teasing here. Is there anything else you want to add before we close out here?
No, I just thanks for having me on. And for anyone that's interested in checking it out, I'd say the best place to check it out is either the website, but also join our Discord if you want to ask questions. And before ordering your hardware, go and check our map to see the other deployed stations around the world and their coverage to kind of determine if the area is suitable for you or if you want to find another location where we can host it.
Thanks, Robin. Again, appreciate the time. Looking forward to our next discussion.
Yeah, thanks, man.